Switch being AZ, and today I'm going to take the rear wheel out of the Bonneville. This is a method that doesn't follow the book exactly. If you have to use one of these because you don't have a center stand, then it's just not going to work. So I'm going to take the shocks off. Yeah, the shocks are held onto posts by these, well, essentially 13mm, but half-inch works. Okay, so give them a pull. There's the top off, there's the bottom off. They go back on just as easily, much better than taking the mufflers off. So that's why I'm doing this. Now, just for space reasons, also it's the way I pull it out as well. I'm going to take the chain guard off. It's got a T3, one of those horrible Torx wrench things that fit here, if I can get it in. There we go. And it's got a 6mm Allen head at this end. Okay, so this is the rear caliper. I am going to take the rear caliper off of the support plate, which is easy to do once you knocked out the piece of wood supporting the tyre. So it can drop freely now that there's no suspension holding it, and now I've got access to both bolts. Okay, bolts are out. Now one of the things I like to do, if I can do it, so I'm going to twist this a little bit, and that frees up some room, so I'm sort of giving it a twist on the disc. Okay, it's not freeing up a lot of room. As you can see, I've put a 2x4 and some 3/4 inch ply under there. I think there's 3 of them all together to lift the rear wheel. And oh look, you have line of sight. You can now get your torque wrenches on over the top of the mufflers, both sides. Okay, I've noticed that the locking feature on this lock nut is one of those metal leaf style. It's got a couple of leaves in the top, so I am going to lubricate it with a bit of WD-40 so that it doesn't rip the snot out of the threads when I undo it. There's 24mm this side, 19 on the other. I've got a wrench on the other side so the axle doesn't turn. I'm just turning the nut. And off you go. So with the wheel up and no suspension on it, it should be somewhat easy to pull these out. Pull the axle out, there we go. And that is going to drop, so you want to hang on to that. It's stopping there on the support for the center stand on the muffler. Okay, well that's handy. I'm going to take this spacer out now and put it on the shaft. Well, I remember where it goes before it falls out. A nice messy bit is unhooking the chain, which is a lot of slack now, because the wheel can go anywhere. And it's off. Taking this spacer out, put it by the shaft. Right, so I'm going to just spin the wheel to sort of kick out the wood. Let the wheel drop. Out the way. Okay, the sprocket is just held in on it all on its own, and it can come out like this, and it just gets it out the way, and there's all these rubber bushings in there. So you tip the wheel over this way, and you can bring it past the mudguard like this, and there's the wheel out. Mudguard, silencers stayed on. So the chain adjusters, which you can see there, they're still in place. Years ago I crimped them, I took them out completely and squeezed the 2 ends in so that they kind of stay in place without falling off. Now on the inside of the sprocket and the push drive, right here, there is a spacer. See, I've just pulled it out. Make sure you don't lose that. It needs to be in there when it all goes back together. Right, so I'm putting the wheel back in now, and I'm doing it without the sprocket on. I'll put that on once I get it in a little bit. Alright, so I've made sure I've got the spacer in there. Very important. Line up all the slots. go. Just needed a bit of skill. Okay, so this is the spacer for the sprocket side that I'm going to put in now. Notice it is grooved, and I do grease it so that it doesn't squeak when you're moving the bike around. Okay, so now we're on the balancing act where I've got the wood blocks under. I lean on the seat and lift it. It's just a bit easier on my back that way to move them forward a bit. Okay, so I've got the, as you can see, I've got the axle partially in through this and the brake holder, but there's not quite enough clearance here. Most swing arms use a gap and then you tighten up the gap as you're tightening up the axle, but not Triumph. At least I'm not on my 2001 version. I don't know if it changed later, but there's not enough room. So what I have to do is get a crowbar out and do a bit of levering. There it goes. Okay, so that is now in. So I've got to hook the chain over, so I'm moving the wheel forward a bit as far as my chain oiler is going to let me. The chain is on. I'm going to move it back a little so it kind of lines up with the holes, but I don't think it does line up with the holes. What I have done is I've put a jack with a piece of plywood on it, and I can jack the front up to get the hole aligned. It's not bad. Got it aligned fairly quickly. You can see it's going in. Obviously it's not going to go in all the way, but I'll be able to jack it up a bit more now. Right, and that's it, hitting the other side of the swing arm. So now I've got to get that aligned. And there it goes. I'm just going to put the axle nut back on, but I think you can see what I mean by the leaf style locking feature. It's got these two metal leaves. Those need to be greased when it goes back on, otherwise they can strip the thread off the end of the axle if there's nothing there to lubricate them. It kind of defeats the purpose of having a self-locking nut, isn't it? Okay, so I've got the torque wrench set to 63. Now one of the tricks I did was I did not make any adjustments. I didn't take the adjusters off at all, so they should be adjusted for the chain slack that was currently on there. So when you're tightening stuff, you can push down on this top link of the chain, and that pulls the wheel forward on both sides of the adjusters. So as you're torquing it up, here it goes. Now let go of it. You won't lose your adjustment and the axle will be pulled forward. I've got a wrench on the other side, reinstalling the chain guard and doing it by hand rather than using a torque wrench. Right, for the next thing we're going to do is we are going to get the wood out from underneath the tyre, and you do that just by turning the tyre backwards. Okay, now why did I do that? That's so I can put the caliper back on. Remember the caliper? And I did separate the pads earlier. Now torque for these is 30 foot-pounds. So the next thing I'm going to do is put the shocks back on. So I've put a tiny dab of grease on the posts. I'm just wiping it around just to make sure that it's easy to get the bushings off next time. Okay, so I'm knocking it back on, and you can see this bushing here is starting to come out. So I'll have to use the bolt to push that back in. Nearly forgot, I've got to put my Lube Man chain oiler back on. One of the nice features about these bi-turbo shocks is that they have a length adjustment at the bottom, as well as the fact that they work a damn sight better than the stock ones. But I had trouble the first time I took the stock ones off. I found the distance between the posts was different on both sides. Great. Lots of tolerance. So you can adjust that out with these adjustable lengths. Okay, I'm just going to cinch off the lock nut here. Doesn't need a lot because it's an aluminum thread, so I'll just round it if I crank on it too much. One last thing and we're all done. Remember I said that I pumped the push the brake pads back on the rear? Well, now you have to pump it out, so I just pump the pads and there they are. It didn't take much. Now the pads are back on the disc. Otherwise, when you drive off and you go for your rear brake, there's nothing there. So you've got to remember to do that. It's all done.